Welcome to the Spiritual Nerds Podcast. We are three friends who are passionate about spirituality, metaphysics, and the journey of awakening. Every week we'll be having heart-led and spirit-filled conversations on topics that interest us. And it is our deepest intention that this podcast serve to open an authentic, vulnerable, and fun space where we can be ourselves, share our stories, and in doing so, it may inspire and support you on your own awakening journey. So, hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the Spiritual Nerds Podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about judgment and how this idea of judging others or judging ourselves or comparison can inhibit our connection to our higher self. And that sometimes it's a pretty big stumbling block when we step onto the spiritual path to be in judgment. Particularly, I think judgment of self, but I think it's also a bit of a pitfall that can sometimes happen when we step onto a path of spiritual awakening, that we start looking around at people in our family circles and our personal circles, even work life and out in the world, and we can so easily step into a place of, well, why aren't they doing it this way, or why aren't they doing it the way that I do it, or geez, they're not fully awake. Look at some of those decisions they're making. And I think that okay, we have to have a lot of compassion for ourselves in that, but I think the awareness of that judgment and that's a process that happens during the spiritual awakening is a big piece in kind of making space to let acceptance in and releasing that self-judgment so that we can more fully step into ourselves. That's the topic. I would love to hear what you guys have to think about judgment. It's a very big topic, so we will not be covering everything, but I think we'll be talking about where it's showing up in our own lives.
Yeah, thank you. Judgment is huge for me. I've noticed I become more aware in the last couple years of how much judgment sneaks up on me. And for me, I definitely feel it towards myself. We all do at certain points, but I notice it more focused outwardly. And my work has been just learning and having an awareness that and with self-compassion, so not judging myself for judging. I think that's the first place it showed up for me, as I was judging somebody because they were so judgmental. That's like where it really clicked for me. And I'm like, wait a minute. I am judging them because they're judging. I was like, oh, this is real interesting. So I think that's often a part of it, is that we judge the things that we don't feel comfortable about in ourselves. So there's a level of self-compassion that comes in. The bigger thing that I have learned through my own process of looking at my own judgment is that the more I am in judgment, the less I am in love. They can't both be there. And my deepest desire on my own spiritual path is to be a vessel of love. And judgment immediately disconnects us from our heart and from a greater sense of that loving wholeness.
Yeah, there's so much here. That last week I had a client who was really looking at judgment for the first time. And I was talking about when I first became aware of my own judgmental mind, it was wild because it almost felt like I didn't have a non-judgmental thought, that all of my thinking was filtered through this evaluation filter. And I think that's how we're raised in our culture. I mean, I do think judgment stems from fear, and fear is the basis of the matrix. And so we kind of get steeped in judgment from the very beginning. And I think it's what disconnects us from our true nature. So becoming aware, if you just practice this, just practice being aware of judgment, it's wild how much of our default mode thinking is judgmental as a form of protection, it's not it's innocent, actually. I think in a lot of ways it's innocent because we're so steeped in it, and it's so automatic. But I also think that when I was first looking at my judgmental mind and just absolutely horrified and amazed at how much I was judging myself and others all the time. And I had the concept at the time that it's completely an illusion, that judgment is completely an illusion, that there's discernment is one thing, but judgment is a whole another thing, that it's absolutely unnecessary, and it's a huge obstacle to being our true selves. I was in a lot of grief at how much of my life I believed in judgment, and I believed in sort of the pursuit of being better from a sense of judgment. So I think there's a lot that unravels when we start looking at our own judgmental mind.
I'm so glad you brought in discernment as a just as a counterpoint to judgment, because they can sometimes get lumped together, but they're very different. And I think for the purposes of this conversation, it's good to take a moment to just talk about the differences. You know, when we're talking about discernment, we're talking about this kind of neutral evaluation of a situation that hopefully in a perfect world is not as charged with all of kind of your cultural upbringing and everything that's there. There's always going to be a piece of that. That's fine. But it has kind of a different tone and feeling to it than judgment, where judgment is this kind of, it's like a filtered evaluation through those kind of like right, wrong, should, shouldn't, you're bad, you're good, those kind of a feelings. So we have to use discernment in so many situations. And I think what's interesting about this whole conversation around judgment is, and even discernment, the two of them, is that there is a level of awareness that we use to pull apart the conditioning that we've had. So there's like a level of reflection and looking at the world once you start to kind of see that certain things don't line up with you, where you can very easily slide into an old way of being, or a way of being that's very judgmental, or that is packed with lots of conditions and expectations. So there's a part of you that needs to hold, that has a little bit of vigilance around, like, oh, I need to be careful because I don't want to just slide into old ways of being. That awareness is the discernment piece. If you find yourself there, you can find yourself in judgment of other people. So it gets very sticky. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, so maybe one of you guys can help me. But it's like you need to have a level of self-awareness to kind of pull yourself out of the matrix, out of the all the stuff that you've been packed on. So there's a part of your brain that is kind of like, I'm trying to be careful here. I don't want to go into automatic mode. And for me, automatic mode can often be very critical, have a lot of comparison, have a lot of judgment. And so there's a similar thing happening where I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be unconsciously sliding into this. So in a way, I'm being analytical and self-aware, but it's not the same as judgment. And I have to turn it over to one of you guys before I ramble too much more. Does this make sense?
Yeah, I think I appreciate the discernment versus judgment, and that's coming up early, because I think it's really important to differentiate the two. And yes, I think that makes sense. And I think of it as discernment is just, like you said, it's neutral. There's an energy behind it that still can hold love, can hold our connection to one another, where judgment, the energy is really low vibrational. And I think about maybe an example of I don't know, somebody borrows money from you and they don't pay it back, and discernment might be, hmm, that doesn't really feel good. I don't think that I will lend them money again if they are to ask, right? And it's just a clear, like, I had this experience. This is a decision I'm making versus judgment is like, oh my God, they are so rude. I can't believe it. They're so irresponsible. I can't believe they're ripping me off, blah, blah, blah. And that's a very different energy than I've learned from this experience. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I'm going to choose a different thing the next time. Right. And so I think there's a big difference between that. We do it a million times a day. We have to make decisions a million times a day. We have to think about how things make us feel and choose certain things. But whether or not we then place judgment on top of that, judging ourselves, judging other people, it is such a low vibrational space to be in, and it does create disconnection. But that's my 2 cents on discernment versus judgment.
Yeah, it makes me think about sort of Abraham, the idea of we're always figuring out what works for us and what doesn't work for us, right? In our becoming. And I think if you orient to that, if you orient to discernment from a place of self-love, or almost just your own becoming and who you really are and everything, it's exciting. I mean, discernment can be it's part of our own becoming, right? And our own discovery. Yeah. For me, I'm more prone to judging myself than other people. And that becomes a little bit more tricky sometimes to notice or catch or something like that. So I still work a lot with self-judgment. And, my teacher, Adyashanti, would talk about the core wound of unworthiness. And I can always see where the self-judgment is sort of rooting down into this, am I worthy? Am I not worthy? Am I worthy? Am I not worthy? And that sense of evaluation and analyzing, it doesn't allow you to experience the full breadth of life and being human and being messy and making mistakes and, kind of being all of it. And I can just see where that's rooted in my childhood, and just how important it was to receive validation and be good enough and everything, even though that doesn't really exist, right? It doesn't really exist. There is no good enough. The question is irrelevant, but a lot of self-judgment, I think, in my life comes from that core wound. But working with judgment, I think, is really one of the most powerful things you can do. I think this was a fun conversation I had last week with this client, where it's like it's really looking at something that operates unconsciously. And when you really focus on that, you really unravel a lot. A lot comes out of that. And there's a lot of freedom and pain and grief and all the things. But I think it's a wonderful practice. I think it's a really useful practice just to observe. You don't even really need to do anything. You could take your judgmental thoughts and transform them. I don't know if you guys have a good example of that. I mean, Shayna, your example was good about the not getting paid back. But there's a way that even just in the observation of your judgmental thoughts, you're transforming them. They are transforming just in being seen, I think.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I have found to go after I identify a judgmental thought is a level of acceptance initially, of just saying, oh, okay, I just had a moment there where I was judgmental, and either towards myself or just to someone else, and just accept it initially and send myself love, send that thought love, send that person love. And then I think the other thing that I'm been really into lately is when things come up that feel difficult for me to witness, either in myself or in the world or in someone that I care about, and I can feel myself like at the top of the slide of judgment, like you're getting ready to go down, and but you're there, like you're aware enough. You're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Is to, that's the acceptance piece, just like, okay, an awareness right there. I notice it. And then look at that thing that's coming up in your life or in someone else's life and just go way, way, way high. Just start getting higher and higher and start looking at it from a very, very elevated level, like a 10,000-foot level, and move into a place of not just acceptance with whatever's happening or showing up, but actual appreciation. Like, this hard thing that's either happening to me or happening to someone else or happening in the world is actually serving a purpose. Because if you have a spiritual belief that says that kind of everything is serving our soul's growth, then even the hard things, when you get far enough out, have point that you can reach appreciation where you're like, this is going to be difficult, but this is going to be a wake up call for me or for someone else or for the world. So when I can get to that place of really, really getting a very broad view of something, then moving to a place of appreciation and trust, then I feel like I I lose the kind of initiative to be judgmental, and it just kind of goes away. And then I'm moving into this place like Shana, you spoke about, where judgment and love can't live together. With appreciation and love each other. they they work very well together. So you just get this sense of relief, and also it's like so much of judgment and comparison and all of that stuff. It's just, it's a, like you said, it's a heavy vibration. It's also just exhausting, really exhausting. And appreciation and love, surrendering to something that maybe you don't even understand that's taking place, like a situation that you don't know all the dynamics of, but that you trust the universe has all the pieces, that God, source, whatever, knows what they're doing. It's the sense of relief. You're like, all right, I don't have, that's off my plate. I don't have to think about it or look at it and think that I have to do anything with it. I just have to move into acceptance. And then if I'm willing to move into higher place of appreciation, then you just get flooded with a real sense of relief and ease.
Totally. Yeah. It makes me think of a metaphor that Wayne Dyer used in one of his books. And he was specifically talking about resentment, but I think judgment, resentment, all of those things sort of lumped together as very low vibrational ways of experiencing and being in relationship to people and in experiences. And he talks about it like the poison of a snake. So whatever the experience is or the situation is sort of like the snake bite, but then the judgment and the resentment or any of those sorts of feelings is a poison that goes into our body, and it's really only hurting us and continues to hurt us until we work through it and release it and operate in a different way. And I think that is just such a potent metaphor of how I experience it. And I think you guys are right that awareness is key and the first step, and to have that awareness with a level of compassion and acceptance for ourselves, for the judgment that we have towards ourselves or to others, just to notice it. Just like you were saying earlier, Ashley, I was sort of shocked and mortified when I first started to become aware, because I'm like, oh, this is who I am. I don't like this at all. But I think we are really conditioned to operate in that way. And one of the things that has been really instrumental for me as a next step to that awareness, and that awareness can just be weeks and weeks of just noticing and be like, oh yeah, there it is again. Okay, it can be there, and I'm willing to accept or look at or be witness to that without adding judgment to the judgment. And then there's forgiveness. I think forgiveness is such a key, powerful practice to healing our judgment towards ourselves and to others. I'm going to stop there.
It's huge. I mean, forgiveness is an incredible practice. And there's no way out of judgment without allowing, accepting, compassion, forgiveness, and being really aware about it's slipping in. And one way I think that this took me a little while to start to begin to notice even the ways that I judge things as good. So, so if we really, really begin to see through the illusion of judgment, that it never existed to begin with, that there really isn't good and bad, we begin to be suspicious of even our judgment of good. Oh, I was good, or that was good, or he's good, or she's good. That experience was good. We feel the resonance in our body when something feels good, when it's, we don't need the label of judgment on it. When we judge something, we're actually probably taking away from our experience. But it's not as, we want to keep the good things in life. Oh, that was a good spiritual experience. I must be a really good spiritual person, And then I had a bad meditation. Well, I must be a bad spiritual person. It also has its own trappings, the judgment of good.
Yeah.
I
So
love that. Yeah. Well, I was just going to say one of the, as a practical piece of advice about how do we start examining or working with judgment or that awareness could be a practice of just what you were talking about, Ashley, where when we have experiences in our life, maybe saying to ourselves, like for a day or a week or whatever, I will no longer use the words good or bad. I will use feeling words about what the experience was for me. And then you're tapping into your body, you're tapping into your intuition, and you're creating a level of self-awareness and a little bit of a pause where that discernment can come in and not necessarily the judgment about an experience. And it can be really small experiences like that ice cream was delicious. Wasn't good or bad. It was delicious, and you know, it gave me a little shiver and put a smile on my face. Like even just simple things like that where it's like a brain hack. You're getting your brain out of this kind of good bad, because good bad, I think what you're pointing out there with that is that really does trigger into that kind of conditioning, the matrix kind of model of like value judgment. And if you can kind of get into like how did something make me feel, you're stepping out of that a little bit, and at least you're tapping into yourself. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off either.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just, it's almost like it's easier to begin when you're noticing, like what Shayna was saying, when you're noticing, it's easier to see the negative judgments. Those flow, but it's harder to see our positive judgments, and it's harder to let go of them. We want them. We want to keep them. We're desperate to keep them. In our pursuit of worthiness, we're desperate to keep our good judgments about ourselves and our lives and our experiences. And it's also incredibly freeing to let go of that pursuit and those labels, and because it's limiting. We come back to it just is. Our experience is just is. We just are. I am. And as we get closer and closer to the truth, I think you were talking about this earlier, you feel more relief, you feel more at peace, you feel less yanked around by that pursuit of worthiness. And it doesn't mean you don't have experiences that feel good and experiences that don't feel good. Those are all still there. There's nothing about this process that means you're only going to feel good for the rest of your life. It's all there, but without the added judgment, without that added limiting factor. And it's just the basic truth is that it's just not true. It's just not real. We made it up. We made up judgment. You go to another culture, you talk to anybody else, they judge things differently. I mean, it can't be true. So, yeah, it's freeing.
I think what you both are speaking to is like a really high level of awakening to be on the path of neutrality, where we are not connected to good, bad, right, wrong, because they are illusions, right? And not that our human experience, we are human, we're living in a human world, we are going to have experiences that are more pleasurable and that don't feel as good. And our natural instinct is to cling to the good and to push away the bad. But this highest level of awakening is that place of neutrality where, just like you were saying, it just is. And we can accept it all, and we don't have to label it all, and we don't have to create stories that create more suffering or more joy or whatever stories we have that do help validate our worthiness or our good enoughness or our whatever. But walking through the world, and this too, this is here, this too, and it is, and I don't need to create anything more than it just is. That is an incredibly freeing space to be in. And I think that that acceptance and that appreciation of all experiences help to create that. And personally, I might dip into that for a little bit, but it's real hard to stay there, at least right now. I'm not there yet where I can stay there for longer periods of time. But I think, yeah, it's a really impactful place of feeling more freedom.
Yeah, I think the neutrality is that phrase, just try to make everything neutral beyond. I try to move into appreciation of everything, but that is hard. That is very hard sometimes. But neutralizing feels like something that is an achievable kind of thing. And so much of what we're talking about here is also just kind of like mind stuff. We're in a world that is constantly kind of, it's engaging our mind. We're in our mind a lot, and something about just being neutral with everything takes the evaluative part of my mind and just, it's like, you're off. I don't need you to do any of this assessment. This is just an experience that's happening. And as Ashley said, everything that we use as an evaluative tool is completely subjective. It's just our way of trying to make sense of these really big, complicated things. I mean, I'm holding back on a topic that I think I'm just going to go ahead and say, and I'll just ask the audience and everyone who's listening to just please bring a bit of grace in this. I don't have it all worked out, but the fact that we have wars going on right now and that people are in suffering and that we are experiencing this in a way currently that is so different. And I know that for me, I hold this long view of the way that humans have been evolving, and I see us on a frickin' upward trajectory. I have no doubt. I hold so much hope for the human experience because I think less people are in poverty, less people are dying every year, and these are stats. In America, more people, at least when *Sapiens* was written, this was one of the facts I pulled out of that book. More people are choosing to kill themselves than there are murders. So when a society is moving to this level, and that's a morbid stat, but I mean, we are becoming safer and safer as a society. The actual like rising of the tide is lifting everyone up. But conversely, at the same time, we have through social media and through the news exposure, intimate exposure to things happening in other parts of the world that are absolutely devastating. And they're things that have been happening throughout civilization. And during like the Middle Ages or even the Industrial Revolution, horrible, horrible things were happening all over the world. And I think now we're in this place where I believe that less of those things are happening, but we have a really strong awareness of them. And I think our consciousness is rising to the place where to witness it is offensive on the soul level. And there's so many people in my life and around that I see are just like really struggling with how sad the situation is with wars and sex trafficking, all sorts of just really human atrocities. And I'm saying all of this to say that for me, the growing edge of neutrality and of awareness is when I look at those things, trying to say that those souls, everyone involved, including us as witnesses, are all participating in this. We are all co creating in this collective consciousness. And that if I can get high enough up, I can see that there is something in this for humanity, and just trying to just bring a little bit of that to some of the heaviest, hardest things that are happening in the world. And that it's very easy to get supercharged and judgmental and go right down to the good, bad. War is bad. I mean, that's where we get into that good, bad thing. It's created by us. It's not good, bad. It's an experience that happens to people, and it's happening at different levels for all of us, whether we're in a bombed out building or we're on a screen scrolling. And I know that there are light years between the two different experiences, but it's all happening in our world and in our experience. And I think to move to neutrality and then to a place of love and light for me is like, that's the work right now, because I don't think going down the rabbit hole of judgment and of this is horrible, this, like, all of those kind of really big feelings that are coming up for people, I don't actually think that that's moving us away from war, because you're at war with the idea of war. So you're bringing in an aggressive, this shall not be stand to something. And I just don't think that's the energy. I mean, I think Mother Teresa said it once when somebody said, how come you never go to a anti-war march? And she said, I would go to a march for love, but I would never go to a march against a war, because it's the wrong kind of energy to bring to something. Maybe too big, but I'm curious to think, what do you guys think about judgment when it comes to these really, really big things that I think a lot of people, it's very easy to go into judgment around, like violence or war. So yeah, there's a hot potato.
I, what I was taking away from what you were saying is the idea of acceptance versus resistance. And I think that to accept war, which, Jeff Foster, I love Jeff Foster's teaching, because he's like, it's already accepted because it is. If something already is, it's already been accepted. And so we just come into acceptance. Well, when you accept something as happening in your system, you're digesting it, you're in it, you're with it. And being with the atrocity, like you're talking about, is important. It is our probably an aspect of change. It's probably how we change. The resistance is a different energy. So that was what I was thinking about, is acceptance versus resistance. And part of my spiritual path, part of my awakening is around acceptance, accepting all of it, really moving towards those places where I feel resistance and letting go and moving into holding and allowing all of it. I don't know. What do you think, Shayna?
It's a really big, that's a whole nother really big topic. But yeah, I think what I'm pulling out of it is similar. It's the Mother Teresa quote, where if we're pushing against it, like this is bad and wrong, that energy, it's just more of the same energy. Versus, I don't think it means like we accept it and so we ignore that it's happening and we do nothing about it, or we're not, which can be part of my go-to. I'll be really honest that it's like, as an empath, it feels so heavy that it can be really, really hard to connect to it. And I don't think that's necessarily the answer, but how can we be connected to it in a way that serves to not create that same type of energy? So in a judgment of like, I don't think anybody would, well, maybe some people might say war is good. There's probably plenty of people who say war is good, but outside of the good or bad, it is what it is. It is happening. And how do we come to a place where we can hold a higher vision? I think that's more of what you're talking about, Nate, of like going as high as possible. How can we be of support to whatever the atrocities are, whether it's war or sex trafficking or, I mean, there's some millions of things that are not, I was going to say not good. There are lots of experiences that can feel very challenging and be in that category of not good. But I like to think, in being in California, it kind of reminds me of the fires, right? And how people became so fearful and against the fires that I felt like it was helped creating, we were going to continue to have fires. And I was in the energy of, no, there were fires. But I'm not going to focus on that. It's going to be the thing that continues to happen. So even in wars, like, yes, we have had wars. Yes, there have been all of these terrible things that have happened throughout civilization. And like you, Nate, I have high hopes of humanity moving in a different direction. And so I choose to hold my focus, not to ignore what is happening, but to be connected to the truths of the experiences that are happening now, and choose to hold my focus in the possibility of where we may be headed, that I see being a lot more love filled and compassionate filled and connected. That, I feel like that was a little bit of a ramble, but that's my response.
No, I think you hit it. I think you hit it. Thank both of you for bailing me out a little bit there. I mean, this is for me this is the exciting part of growth and of spiritual awakening and awareness. It's like taking these kind of big principles that we have, these ideas, and then bringing them into life with life's most biggest challenges and being like, does it hold up? Can I make it work with something that's really big and cumbersome? So that's kind of why I went there. I was just thinking it might be kind of nice if we talked about it a little bit, but maybe we could go around real quick before we wrap and just say one practice that we think that might be helpful for someone who's is trying to become aware of their judgment. And for me, I would just say, I find that like the morning reflection, I used to hate the idea of journaling because I felt like I was always being told to journal by people who were published authors. And I'm like, of course you love journaling. You're a published author. It's like your way of expressing yourself. But I have begrudgingly become a fan of however you like to do it. But it's just, there's something powerful about sitting down when your mind is quiet in the morning and just doing a little bit of a reflection. And I feel like that process translate throughout your day. If you start it in the morning, that process of just like awareness, reflection, how am I feeling? That can strengthen, I think, a muscle that translates into an awareness of when judgment is creeping in. So I'm going to endorse as a practice journaling or some kind of a reflective practice in the morning. Journaling works the best for me.
I love journaling.
Yeah.
I've been a journal for a long time. Two practices that come to mind for me, something that I've used myself and offer to clients that I've worked with, is timers, just to help create the awareness, to have timers throughout the day on your phone. I don't know, like 3 or 4 times that are just, what are you thinking? How are you feeling? And this, it might be like, where are your thoughts? Might be the little note on the timer to just help you get into the practice of awareness until it becomes more natural to notice. And again, to do that from a place of compassion so that we're not dumping judgment on top of judgment. And then the other one is forgiveness meditations, to practice forgiveness to yourself for the judgments, to others who you have judgments against, is a really powerful way that I have experienced to move through that energy.
Yeah, I would say meditation. I mean, that's the main sort of instruction I give in my meditation groups or on retreat is allowing everything to be as it is. And when you really practice that allowing, it's so much easier to see our mind. It's you're holding that sense of allowing allows you to see your mind, number one, but also hold it in a way that it can be understood and transformed. And that was the one thing I was going to add to the conversation you brought up, Nate, was inviting things into our system, accepting everything as it is, allows us to be transformed. It invites that transformation. And so, and that's what we're doing here. We're here to experience and grow. But I would say meditate in that sense of allowing, not meditation to try to achieve something, but meditation in allowing everything to be just as it is, I think is an incredible practice in seeing the workings of the mind.
I love both those suggestions. Those are great. Okay, everyone. So I think we're ready to wrap. Hopefully you don't judge this podcast when you listen to it. It's my little cheeky wrap up there. No, really. I mean, I think, Ashley, I love that last point as we're closing. All of these things that we talk about on this podcast are really, they're invitations to transformation. They're just the recognition and the discussion around all of the various ways that when we step onto the spiritual path, different things show up for us to accept and to integrate and to love and to bring to light. And it's just, there is no should around any of this stuff. It's just like, if it's something you're called to do and you find yourself in these same waters, hopefully these conversations are making you feel seen, and that that other people are out there experiencing the same things that you are. And yeah, it's a beautiful journey. So thanks for joining us today.
All right, spiritual nerds, thank you for listening to today's episode. We had so much fun. And if this episode resonated with you, hit the subscribe button and consider leaving us a review. We would appreciate that so much. And consider sharing this with the people in your life who you think might enjoy these conversations. Also, if you have a question, let us know. Email us at spiritualnerdspodcast@gmail.com, and we may just answer those questions on the show. Much gratitude and many blessings, and have a wonderful day.